But then the emotional piece, 2.5 years of really not, and what you had just said there was no one teaches us, or we don't learn that our emotional well-being is our responsibility. And that's really the crux of this. I was putting my emotional well-being on my wife.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches the point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the transformation story that so many men can relate to. Craig, a husband and father and business owner, spent years chasing success, approval, and validation, only to find himself exhausted, resentful, and stuck. He bulldozed his way through life believing that if he just did more, he'd finally earn the love and appreciation he craved. But instead, he found himself emotionally drained, disconnected from his wife, and numbing the pain with alcohol. Then came a breaking point, a moment of raw desperation that forced him to face the truth. The validation he was chasing could never come from outside of himself. Today, Craig shares how he stepped out of resentment, reclaimed his confidence, and became the man his family needed. Not by demanding more from them, but by owning his own self-worth. If you've ever felt like you're running on a hamster wheel of achievement, hoping it will bring you peace, this episode will hit home. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Craig. Nice to have you here today. We're recording this on Tuesday morning. It's fresh and cold here in Pennsylvania. How are things where you are?
Also cold, and though supposedly it's supposed to be like 50 degrees tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that.
Pretty
I've been
good
battling bad firewood and have another load coming today. Hopefully it's better.
Yes. Speaking of firewood, you might appreciate this. I burn a lot of wood this time of year, and our last load was delivered on a muddy day. And so the front end loader that they used to scoop it out into the dump trailer, it got all of the dirt. So it's just super dirty wood. And I've had to clean my stove about once a month.
Yeah, I similarly have. We took down a bunch of trees like 5 years ago, and I just never processed the wood. And the wood got processed 2 years ago, and it's been sitting in a pile. And that was sort of extra wood. And so now I'm like trying to chop the like rotten parts of it off. And this morning I was down there because my wife decided she was going to do some maple syruping today, and she didn't have any wood to do that. So I had to like chop small pieces so she could do it. So I've been getting updates all day about how that's going.
That's a big commitment. Well, I like to start these.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah.
I like to start our episodes by just orienting our listeners to some basic demographic information. Who you are, where you are, what you do when you're not on podcasts, this sort of thing. Realizing, you're telling a pretty authentic and raw story. I would invite you just to be as detailed as you'd like to be, but nothing that you'd regret if it was on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah. Well, I'm 41 years old. I have 3 daughters ranging 7 to 13. I will be married 14 years in May, and I am an insurance professional. I am living in the town that I grew up in, which my parents and sisters are still there. So there's 8 nieces and nephews, pretty good sized family in our area. And as far as what I like, I love golfing. I don't get to do it as much as I would like to. And, that's part of having a family, but I really enjoy the outdoorsness of it, being outside, being with friends. There's a competitive level to that. I grew up an athlete and played in college soccer and track, and my body at 41 is not really able to do the things that I grew up doing. However, I think that golf is a really like a great supplement of that.
So if time and money were no object for you, how often would you like to play golf?
Every single day.
Really? Okay.
I
All
mean,
right.
I haven't been able to, so I don't know. Maybe if I did that, I would be like, but, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like make this a golf podcast, but there's so much to it. I think that people that don't play or maybe don't play enough, it's very strategic. There's a lot of thought that has to go into everything. It's very social. It's just great. And you're out there. It's beautiful. Almost every golf course is just, it's so beautiful and unnaturally, I suppose, because, there's a lot of but it's very nice. I describe it as like chess on grass, with a little ball, which I also love chess. I have a board here right there.
Is there like a core emotional state you feel after you've had a long day on the golf course? If you've played 9 or 18 holes, is there a way that you feel when you're done that you do that for?
So I prefer playing 9 holes, and the course near my house is a 9-hole course, and that's because it's like 2 hours as opposed to 4 to 4.5 hours. And as long as I'm doing that and it's not rushed, and it just feels freeing and relaxing, and spending time with friends is a nice, I would say it's just a freeing feeling.
Okay, so freedom, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying is you enjoy playing golf because you enjoy freedom. Fair statement?
I'm not sure there's anything that I enjoy more than freedom.
Okay. Yeah, that's fairly common attribute around men. So that's a great way to kind of begin this conversation. You and I have known each other, I know it's been at least since 2022. I don't remember when, but we're probably heading into our 4th year pretty soon here. And as a way to set the stage, if I had met you 4.5, 5 years ago, how would you have described yourself?
Jeez.
And just to interject real quick, that could be yourself as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a leader.
I would say
that sort of thing.
Frustrated.
Okay. So we have Craig, the man who wants freedom, who is experiencing frustration.
Yeah. Frustration, sadness, confusion, misunderstanding of what was going on in my life. Yeah, that's a pretty good summation.
Could you tell us a little bit about what life felt like on a day-to-day basis? Like, what was the average day like for you experientially? And I don't mean like, how did you spend your time, but more about like the internal state that you went through every day. What was that like?
I felt like I was just chasing something constantly, I guess. And it was sort of like chasing that freedom that I was looking for. And maybe at the time I didn't realize that that's what I was looking for. Acceptance, certainly looking for that as well. But yeah, it was a very challenging time.
So you mentioned chasing, and I'm curious how like you would translate that into a really relatable understanding. How did you approach life and relationships, success, fatherhood, marriage? Like, how did chasing dictate how you approach those parts of your experience as a man?
Yeah, so I think if I go back a little bit further, I was chasing what my idea of success was, and I was a bulldozer in that regard, where trying to build my business, build my house, like literally build my house. And what I thought doing those things would do was to build my relationship with my wife stronger, that those things would be recognized, and I would be appreciated for, ultimately providing in a exceptional way, and that, I would have chasing this acceptance and relationship with her, great intimacy and all of that. I was chasing like the picture perfect world.
So do you mean to say that this bulldozer, this freedom-loving bulldozer, was running around kind of, exhausting himself, just trying to literally move mountains at times to get the adoration, respect, appreciation of your wife?
Oh, yeah.
Fair statement. Fair statement.
A very good description of that. Yeah, just...
Was it fulfilling?
No, every time I did something that wasn't recognized as this like wonderful thing, and with, being bowed down to in appreciation, I didn't understand it, and it made me really sad. And I drank a lot to sort of numb out the feelings of, because the way that I took it when I those things weren't appreciated, if my wife was feeling stress about having 3 young children and building our home, and me spending tons of time, away and on the house, if she was feeling any sort of stress, I took that personally as though like I was failing.
Like,
And
did that show up as a feeling like you needed to do more? Did it make you double down on the bulldozer?
yeah, I assumed that I wasn't doing enough, and that I just needed to do more, and that I needed to prove to her that everything that we were doing was worthwhile, and that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and sort of dismissing anything that she felt of just the stress of everyday life, and ignoring it, and pushing on, and we must do this. And there's so much that goes into that. You feel like, at least, well, I felt like I have a very short window to show my girls what it means to work hard, and that we don't get everything because we want it, that you have to work for it. And if they don't see that in these formative years, then I will have failed as a father, and that they need to see us, striving and working and pushing, because things just don't come to you falling from the sky. And yeah, the sadness and the challenge is that my wife is experiencing very normal feelings of stress and anxiety, and not having the same level of drive that I did. And so I wasn't experiencing her in a positive way, because she was having her own experience with all of this, and I was just, then I turned to alcohol. So the alcohol is, I don't talk about it as much probably as I should. I'm now, I think, 40 months sober as of like yesterday. And that part happened right around the same time that I started doing this work. So a few months earlier, but it allowed, like, I stopped numbing all of that pain that I was experiencing, and it became very raw, which was really important, because I then had to face all of this stuff. And if becoming sober came first, and then it was very raw. I tried therapy, and I didn't, and this isn't a jab against therapy, but for me, in my experience with that, it didn't work, because I felt like it was just, I felt very victimized by my wife. I felt like she was ungrateful and unappreciative, and that was the cornerstone of how I felt about my marriage. And that made me very frustrated and very upset. And basically what therapy felt like for me was just validation of those things. That she was ungrateful, she was unappreciative, she had her own issues to work out, and there was never anything that I could do. I'd come out of every session just scratching my head, feeling like I feel very disempowered to do anything about my life.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the expression low mood therapy versus high mood therapy? High mood therapy encourages you, more like we do in our community, to focus on what you want to create. It's more a focus on gratitude and reframing, and showing you that you have the power to write the story that you're living in, instead of feel like a victim to it. And low mood therapy is more about basically a gripe session. I think the intention is good. It's to give people a place to express their hard emotions without judgment. But for men, what I hear all the time, because everybody I talk to tells me the same two things: I tried therapy, and then they feel like they have to apologize why therapy didn't work for them. But I think what's missing in a lot of therapy, that I do see a shift there. And I'm not a therapist, just to be really clear to our listener, but I talk to a lot of men, so I hear therapy stories all the time. And I also have observed a shift where I think some therapists are catching on, that men actually appreciate challenge quite deeply. They want empathy, they want compassion, they want kindness, they want warmth, they want understanding. But if you just leave it there with the man, if you just give him a place to vent his frustration, but you don't actually help him move to a place of empowerment, he'll feel worse, because he just purged his insides, but he didn't really get anything for it. So what a lot of men find really useful about coaching and mentoring in a community like ours is that it doesn't stop after empathy. it's not divorced from empathy. Empathy is first, but that it's the foundation for then helping him become empowered.
Yeah, I can remember asking him, the therapist, one of the couple of last sessions, and I was just like, is there anything I can do? Do you have any homework, books for me to read, like something for me to do? And he was like, yeah, I can make some suggestions. But even in his mind, and this is something my wife and I talk a lot about, is all of the external feedback that I was receiving from friends, her family, my family was, Craig, you're so amazing. You do all of this stuff. You're so wonderful. And she should be more grateful. That was the constant refrain, and what she was hearing as well. Of course he, is upset or lack of affection and your stress and anxiety and all of that. Like, you need to change. Everybody was pointing at her, and so I felt hopeless. I felt hopeless for these feelings that I had to change, because I felt like if I could just change her, I would feel better. And the only way to change her was to keep doing more to impress her in some way. But that was what was causing all of this stress and anxiety. And I never really sitting back and listening to what she was experiencing. And this isn't an excuse for, some of the behaviors that I was experiencing from her, but it's hurt people. And when you're in pain, it's hard to see other people's pain. So I was experiencing a lot of pain, and I couldn't see hers. So we both actually quit drinking basically on the same day. It was Halloween of 2021. It just was such an enormous shift. And, I don't want to say like there was circumstances around why I didn't have like a rock bottom. She had quit 6 months prior and had sort of gone back to it for a short period of time, then came. But a friend of mine died in a tractor accident, and like a very, 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 very good man. And that was a few days before. And it sort of pushed me towards a lot of self-reflection to say, like, this is not serving me. It's not serving my family. It's not serving my life. It's not serving my purpose. And I knew that I was numbing out these things that I needed to figure out. And so that was the catalyst and then a few months later, it was April of 2022, where we had gone on a family vacation to Virginia Beach. And I hovered around my wife so much looking for validation. And I was in the Airbnb and I was looking out into the ocean there in Virginia Beach, and there were these dolphins swimming by, and the kids and my wife ran out onto the beach to watch these things. And so I went out, and everyone was in their pajamas, and I go out and I would just hover around her, and I gave her a hug, and all the hugs were just very guarded. So it was like, this person didn't want a hug from me, but I just continued to lay it on. And so she kind of gave a hug, walked down the beach some more. I went in for another one, and she like audibly is just like, and I don't remember verbatim, but I'm pretty sure she said like, "Can you get off of me?" And it like just utter frustration. And I'm like, it was another dagger of to me, like, this person loathes you, certainly doesn't love you, can't stand you touching them. And what am I doing? So I
don't go too deep into the story. I want to hear more, but let's put a pause in there, a pregnant pause, so that we come back to that tension. Because I love the emotion I'm hearing in this meeting. I think a lot of men listening will identify with this, because you're describing a pretty classic anxiously attached man who's feeling like, hey, shouldn't all my bulldozing be earning me affection? Not realizing that all of the years you're bulldozing and building, which is really common for us as men, your wife felt isolated and alone, especially as a new mother. And so she's got all this distrust, right? But I want to talk about before we get into kind of, because you're approaching your breaking point, and I want to hear it, but I want to hear a little bit more in the day-to-day. What were the repeated conflicts that were happening between you and your wife kind of leading up to this? Was it this pattern? Was it others?
There were two, that she was with the kids all the time and she didn't get enough of a break from the responsibility of motherhood and just taking care of the kids. She was a teacher and she was a preschool teacher. So she was with 3 to 5 year olds basically nonstop for 6 years, because she had them at work and she had them at home. One of our children was at that preschool age. And then you have slightly older, slightly younger. And she just didn't get away from them. And so I would do my best to try to give a reprieve from that. But it would be like, a day trip, 4 to 6, 7 hours on a weekend where I took the kids, because I was still trying to build and also take breaks myself, because I was, just constantly building. When I was actually building the house, there were times I was up until 2 a.m. and I was drinking 3 or 4 Red Bulls just to stay awake so I could get the house done, because we had a construction loan and we had to refinance and it had to be done in a certain time. And there was just like this constant pressure that, like, here I am sitting back and thinking, like, how do you not see I'm like literally killing myself to do this for us? Like, appreciate me, appreciate. And it wasn't. And I was just flabbergasted that all of this that I was doing wasn't appreciated. And yeah. So I'd made up these stories in my head that there must be something else going on. Like she hates me, or there's an affair happening or something. So, the day to day was just a constant of her being frustrated that she was with the kids all the time, me reviewing that from a logical standpoint and dismissing the things that she was saying. Oh, well, I took them, what do you want from me? There aren't two Craigs. Like, I can't be a dad and a husband and take them as much as you want and also build the business and our lives. I cannot do it. I felt pulled in multiple directions and failing at everything. That's how I felt.
I used to tell my wife I felt like she wanted me to be Chuck Norris and Fred Rogers wrapped up into one. It felt like an impossible kind of combination that she wanted.
It did. It felt impossible, and I was trying. And then I also felt like I needed breaks. So I would go golf. I would not go to work, and I would go golfing every now. And this didn't happen that frequently, but 3 or 4 times throughout the summer, where I wouldn't tell her, and then she'd find out, and she would just lose it, because I own my business, so I had flexibility that I was kind of able to do what I wanted to do, and she didn't have that flexibility because she had to go to work, she had to pick up the kids, she had to be with the kids. Here I had this flexibility, she didn't have that flexibility, and that was a bone of contention. And so there was the part of her just feeling like she never got a break and was dismissed by me, that she was, the feeling that she needed a break, I was dismissing of. And then,
can I add one more thing to this that our listener might not necessarily piece together? I think you'll know is, on top of that, you also brought an emotional energy that was just like the kids, meaning when you need something constantly from a woman, especially a mother, you're kind of registering on the same radar that the kids' needs kind of show up in her awareness too. So you end up feeling like a fourth kid,
Well, we joked, like in couples counseling sessions, it was joked about that I was basically the 4th child, which I used to just take so personally. And so in the 2 parts of what I was, the day-to-day constant frustrations were the child part and then sex and intimacy, which it would take a while for me to figure out was really there was a lot of pressure on her to provide that to me, because that is how I felt. The emotional hole in me was closed up and filled when she was intimate with me. That is what I was looking for. And so that was like a black cloud that followed us around all the time. It really, it was there's part of that biological piece where it's like, yes, there's the biological piece of wanting, physical intimacy, but really and that's how she felt it, was that I was a man, and I expected her to provide wifely duties as a woman. And if she didn't, I was upset and angry.
Can I interject something? A lot of men just say, well, so what's wrong with that? That's just normal. And I don't think a lot of men can understand this. So I like to flip it around and give a man a relatable scenario. Imagine that just about every time you saw your wife, especially if you're like a sole provider, she said, I really need you to add another digit to our income. Or she constantly felt like she needed more money. Now, a lot of guys will say, well, that is true. But the closest thing I know of that men feel is like that their material provision is never enough. That's how a woman feels when her affection, intimacy, and sexual attention is in this scenario. Like there's no amount that seems to be satisfying, and it feels like hopelessness to her because it essentially makes her a slave to an insatiable appetite that the man has to find his value and worth from her sexual attention. And if you've ever been frustrated that you feel like your financial attention is not enough for your wife, you're feeling the same set of emotions that she does as far as feeling like she has to keep giving that.
Yeah, I mean, that's so I think you said this, like it was an insatiable, she couldn't ever fill it, no matter what. And, we had done couples counseling and the love languages. And so it was just reaffirmed that it was okay for me to need this from her. That was just like, what society and everything was giving both of us was, like you need to continue. You just need to find a way to provide that. And so this was crazy. Our first couples counselor was a man. He was the one that told us to read the Love Languages book. And so I went into that basically believing that she was the one with the problem and she needed to get fixed. And I didn't even read the book, and she did. And I think that was a big turning point of her frustrations of, I just wanted to go into couples counseling for her to change and give me more physical intimacy. And not even reading the book was just like a highlighter on the point that, like in her mind, I just wanted her for one thing, and hopefully this strategy would get her to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think fair point, because it was pretty much true by your own kind of reflection. And I'm not saying that to beat you up. I'm saying that as a man, like, who can relate to these things. You really want her to change. And a lot of men drag a partner into therapy essentially just to get a professional validation that they have a wife problem, which puts her in a state of feeling a tremendous amount of pressure, but also a tremendous amount of judgment. And then a guy can't understand, why doesn't this woman want to be intimate with me? Oh, I don't know. Probably because you think she's horribly broken and you've gotten a jury to agree with you that that's the case, right? This is what happens.
Every single juror was on my side. And it got to a point where the guy actually said to her, at the end of the day, you're just going to have to give the gift, like regardless of whether or not you want to. So that was the first guy. So after our last child, she had a male gynecologist, OBGYN. And for a long time, she felt like something was wrong with her. And I have more in like how packed our life was. She had a very, very good reason to be tired and stressed and not feeling that way that I didn't understand. But the gynecologist says to her, she had gone in and asked about like low libido, and he gave her, various options and surgery and testosterone and, things that like I wouldn't even want her doing. And he says to her, well, you're just going to have to give it up. And if you don't, he'll find it somewhere else. So she leaves, so these are two people with a doctorate or a medical degree telling her that basically you have no sovereignty over your body if you want to remain in a marriage. And then secondly, if you don't, your husband's going to have an affair. Now, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the OBGYN had told her that until a couple of years ago. I found that out. But I was just like, that is not appreciated.
It's actually really, really horrible. Culture has normalized an acceptance of emotionally immature males. And instead of calling men to a high standard of emotional resiliency, safety, and maturity, has basically told females, well, this is just how men are. They need sex to be okay with themselves. And so that's on you.
Yeah. And literally every single person around us is just saying that same thing. And I mean, you know my story, so you know that it took me a long time to figure out that what I was looking for from her, while yes, there was the biological piece and attraction and all of that, which I embrace and think is totally normal. But beyond that was this very deep emotional hole that I had within me of low to no self-worth if she was not providing this. So when she was not providing this, I felt like a piece of shit. Like I felt like I wasn't living up to whatever standard and this fairy tale idea that I had that, well, society said if I work hard, bust my ass, make a bunch of money, provide super well, I'm going to have this queen that I come home to that just showers me with love and affection and you know, the Stepford wife, basically. And I did my part, but she wasn't doing her part. And I deeply resented her for that.
You're basically describing a very civil way of making a woman a whore. That basically, through giving her the right stuff, she is dutifully bound to give you sexual attention. Now, I want to say this because guys are going to hear this and say, "Oh, that's Ben Masterson, guy's a sexless simp," and I'm not a sexless male. I have a very satisfying sex life because I've thrown away this super ridiculous, boyish view that women owe me any kind of sexual attention. And I'm saying that because I don't think men really understand what this perspective, like how poorly it paints a woman, and then how that very poor view of a woman creates the very issue that they have, which is, why would a woman want to be intimate with you if you objectify her and basically believe that you could just go and achieve a bunch of stuff in the world and she's just going to feel duty bound to sleep with you? In what world is that attractive?
Well, no, right? Like if you step back from it and actually look at it. And so here, you know, and I don't want to go too far down the road, but that's basically what I had to do. So I have 3 daughters, and towards the culmination of realizing like something is drastically wrong here. And I love my wife. She's an amazing woman. She's very frustrated with me for some reason that I could not understand. But I asked myself, would you want your daughters with a man that is behaving and feels the way you do towards your wife? Would you want them with a man like you? And it was like an instantaneous no. Like, no, of course I wouldn't. And so then I was like, oh my God, like, why is this? Why would she want to be with a man? And you know, I'm a good man. I didn't want to be treating her this way or objectifying her. I just believed, and her constant refrain is you expected me of this. I was duty bound to provide all of this. And I constantly, this is a little bit of a battle that we have between ourselves. And I constantly say, no, I just thought that you would, you know,
same
like,
thing. Yeah, that's mincing words, but that's still an expectation.
Right. And it's like, I thought that if I did all of this, that you just would. And I couldn't possibly understand why you weren't, or that you...
Well, let me interject something here, because I want to affirm that, especially to a man listening, most guys are like you. There is no nefarious, wicked, evil character flaw. And I think it's important to underscore this, especially for women too, is that you weren't waking up saying, how can I be a maximum asshole today? You were waking up saying, you know what, I care about my family, I care about my world. You were following a script given to you that said, this is how you're supposed to do it, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because it's really easy for some people to judge that there was a deeper flaw behind this, that you were like secretly evil and sinister, right? That you're plotting. And what you just described to me was a man that really thought he was doing his best. And I hear this every day. Men are kind of looking in the rearview mirror saying, wow, I totally didn't see that. And so they have a hard time sometimes owning, when talking to her about it, they have a hard time responding to the intensity of how she experienced it emotionally. because they feel like they're confessing by kind of saying, yeah, I get it. They feel like they're confessing to that judgment, and it's not, right? So this is kind of challenging for a man to learn how to validate your wife's experience of it without feeling like you have to agree to an inauthentic motivation, right? This happens in all kinds of stuff with men. Like we're accused of something and we say, hey, that wasn't how it was for me inside. And so then we leave her without any kind of a validation for her pain because we're hung up on the words. We could revisit that another time, another place, but I wanted to point that out for the guy listening, that this is kind of a nuanced territory, because what it means then is a woman never gets that emotional loop closed because she felt it as you had expectations. And if you get hung up on the precision of the accuracy of the word expectation, what you'll do is deprive her of the validation of what her experience was like, and she won't trust you because it's an open loop.
Yeah,
for her.
I think, this could probably be, an entire podcast in and of itself. But what I think that the nuance here is actually the most difficult thing that I have worked through, because genuine feelings of, attraction and drive, and I am not able to sort of delineate those or parse them out from this intense feeling of emotional neediness that I had and was being sort of alleviated, or the salve that I was getting from her, when she was intimate.
I'll have you back. We'll do another episode about some of those nuances.
Yeah. But I think that was, and again, you know the story, but that was in the last 60 days that was the biggest, like, I think figuring that piece out for me was enormous, and even her saying something really does feel like you have changed now, where I embrace my manliness and my sexual drive and all of that. Like I feel very fortunate that I have that as a man. What I never could understand up until shortly, 60 days ago or so, was the enormity of the emotional toll that was taking on her, by like sucking that out of her, because that hole in me was so deep that if I wasn't receiving sex and physical intimacy or affection, that I was not a whole person. There was something like internally flawed within me, and she could never fix that, no matter how much she provided it. And she tried for years, but then that became this just weight of expectation that was the ultimate unraveling of us. It needed to, though. And so we're not...
To summarize that point, just for, again, people listening, what you're saying, and I affirm and agree with, is that a man's sexual desire and interest is not a problem. It's the why behind it. So an emotionally mature, grounded, confident, calm man sees his sexual impulses as a gift to give. A needy man uses sex as a strategy to achieve a momentary sense of self-worth. And so they're two different whys. A man who does the latter cannot have enough sex to feel good about himself. He thinks he can, but to the woman in his life, it essentially makes her a vending machine, and she will deeply resent it for good reason. A man who feels good about himself actually can more deeply own his sexual desire, express it, and with ease and enjoyment for both him and his partner, because he's giving something, which is an entirely different energy than saying, I need you. I need to consume something from you. And I just want to highlight that because this is a very nuanced topic. And a lot of guys think they hear somebody like you or me saying, you should be less interested in sex. And that's not the case at all. It's just having a different why behind your sexual desire.
Yeah. And I think that the key there is, if you're giving a gift to somebody and they say that they're not interested in it, this could go for any gift, that you wouldn't be like distraught. You're going to be like, okay, well, maybe you'll be interested in receiving this gift next week or another time. And then you'd go about your day and you'd be fine. But I wasn't. I was just a dick. Right? Like at the worst periods of time where, she said she wasn't interested or something, I was like a pouty little boy. The way that was experienced was this. And again, for women, like, I I was never physically angry or upset, but there's just sort of like, she's described them as microaggressions. I'm not sure that I would, but, for lack of better word, that's, just the sort of.
You want to know why that term? It's aggressive. It's aggressive because it is an attack on her emotional safety, meaning she quickly learns that you take something from her in those moments, which is an aggressive act. Like when you remove warmth, kindness, appreciation, just the kind of undergirdings of a healthy relationship. When you weaponize the acceptance of a partner, it's an act of aggression, whether you know you're doing it or not. Like women see that as an attack on their sense of security.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, underscoring all of this too is like her knowing that, deep down, I am this caring, loving person, but that there's this like deep issue that I have.
Yeah.
And so, we both stuck by each other working through this, but it has not been an easy road. I understand why a lot of people get divorced.
Yeah,
simply
me too.
Because it takes an incredible amount of love and loyalty and understanding, empathy for another person, to look beyond these like one or two things that that you'd be judging the marriage on. And
there's a big upside to that, though, and that is because a lot of people wonder, can you come back from this? And not only can you come back, but a lot of people don't understand that the hurt that you recover and heal from as both an individual and as a couple is the foundation for deep intimacy. Meaning intimacy is fundamentally rooted in mutual acceptance and mutual vulnerability. And so when your partner has seen you at your absolute worst and accepted you, and you've seen them at their absolute worst and accepted them, and you both have had to overcome tremendous personal pain and hurt, and you've found a way to forgive, how to deeply accept one another and yourself, you have just created a bedrock for a kind of intimacy that most human beings will never experience. And the reason they won't experience it is because they weren't willing to go through the mud together, the muck, right? This is like that's a really, really hard season of marriage to have all of this ledger, as we call it, of mutual contempt, resentment, anger, hostility. Most people just declare emotional bankruptcy and divorce, right? But when you actually do the hard work of reconciling the ledger and going through and removing the transgressions and just understanding each other, which is hard, tedious work. But what you're doing is you're creating intimacy in that process. And I'm sharing that just to encourage you and actually anybody listening that you have to let go of the idea that this is impossible. It's actually that the journey itself is achieving the very thing that you've always wanted. And it's very hard to see that when you're in the middle of it.
It definitely is. I mean, and I think for both parties, because there's when you're doing this work, there's the cerebral piece of it, that
the information.
Yeah, like I received that relatively quickly. Like that was, I ate it up, doing the Renewed Masculine Man course with you. That was like a huge piece of me getting it, from a logical standpoint. But there still was so much more work, but I thought because I had logically understood it, that should be recognized in her, and everything should just like flip and turn around because I got it. But I had not understood how much of an emotional hole I really had. And I had a lot more work to do to figure that piece out, which is fine.
A lot of it is time, because what you're describing is essentially moving from emotional childhood to emotional manhood. And just like in, the rest of life, there's a period of adolescence. You're not an adult, you're not a child. And there's an emotional adolescence that every human being must go through. And most men alive today in Western culture have never gone through emotional adolescence because they never left emotional childhood. And what I mean by childhood, and that's not a dig. In childhood, you're taught that everybody gives you what you need, right? You're hungry, mom and dad feed you. And so you get released into adulthood in some ways. You get a driver's license, you go to college, you get a job. But a lot of people have never learned to be atomic and responsible for themselves emotionally. It's just missing in men today. And so adolescence, you can't rush it. Just like you can't take your kids when they're like 10 and say, okay, now we're just going to skip to 18. There's just a period of time where your children need to learn to let go of everything that was life in childhood and embrace what is, what comes with adulthood. And there's no single day where there's a binary switch, right? You're just like you're releasing one and you're holding on to another. And that happens emotionally with men too. And so even though we do courses and coaching and all this stuff, a lot of men, they intellectually understand it way before they experientially understand it. And that takes time. It's probably on average 12 to 18 months for most men if you're pretty hardcore. Some men longer.
Yeah, I mean, it took me longer. I think, what was an odd thing for me, I guess, is like, I think I got the intellectual piece of it very quickly.
You did, yeah.
But then the emotional piece, 2.5 years of really not. And what you had just said there was no one teaches us, or we don't learn that our emotional well-being is our responsibility. And that's really the crux of this.
Mm-hmm.
I was putting my emotional well-being on my wife. And because of how large that hole was that I really didn't even recognize, that was an enormous amount of weight to be putting on that also has all of these other things going on. A lot of emotional distress that she had 4 years ago, it'll be 5 years in August. She lost her mother to cancer.
Mm.
And so just a lot of emotional distress. And yet here's this leech of a man that from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I live this too, so I don't have any judgment about it. I
think
my own
that's
leech days.
Really the, like, for anyone that's listening, there's it's a separate thing. Like I am as independent as a person can be when it comes to my physical well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I am
business overachiever, just like most guys I speak with.
I'm a DIYer to a fault. Like I joke, and you've heard me say this, I'd do my own dental work if I could. Like I like to a ridiculous level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But emotionally, the opposite end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine, for a spouse, for a wife to be with a man like that, who is so grounded and self-reliant from a physical standpoint and, well-being, to be that frail and needy from an emotional standpoint. And then those like intertwining sometimes where you're not even really able to tell what the hell is going on. It's got to feel like pretty uncomfortable and unsafe, I would think. And that's what she was experiencing. And on the outside, nobody can see that. All they're seeing is the external me, this person that seems like a rock, but isn't. I mean, this goes back to my drinking. Like, I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to be alive. And that's what like drinking basically accomplished for me, is that I escaped this realm of feeling. It was the emotional turmoil that I was feeling, and drinking alcohol helped that. And
was there a breaking point where all this, the drinking, the intimacy, the emotional immaturity, and this is kind of taking you back to your beach story. Like, how did this creep up? Like, what was the breaking point where this became a crisis for you?
Well, yeah. So it was, I would say, like a 4 to 6 month thing where the friend of mine that passed away, and to pay homage to this man, like some friends and I went out to, have a beer, quote unquote. I ended up, closing the local bar down till 3 a.m. And that's the last time I ever drank. And I was disgusted with myself the next day that I had used this man's death as just another excuse to go out and get bombed. Had 3 children at home, a wife that wouldn't ever see him again. And I just felt like all of these things that I thought of myself of being this grounded rock of a person was clearly not the case, that I would drown all of my emotional, and I viewed it as a weakness. I was like, well, clearly I'm weak emotionally. I knew that. But I knew that the alcohol was not helping me. It was a crutch that I was leaning on. And now I had felt like I'd used up my 9th life, and probably 27, lives of just nothing happened that night. But it was that waking up the next day and just being like, you are emotionally unwell that you would do that. So that was shortly after that, I started the therapy. And then so April is when I did from like November to April is when I was doing therapy, like trying to get to the bottom of this. But again, like I was feeling like, yeah, I drink because I feel victimized by this wife that doesn't love me. And so go back to the beach story. She, basically throws her arms up of like a physical, like, you need to get away from me. This emotional weight of you sucking emotional well-being from me. I just can't do it anymore. She didn't say those words, but I would learn that she had one foot out the door herself of just, this was just too much being with this needy person that couldn't take care of themselves emotionally. So I walked off the beach sort of demoralized and thinking like the evidence is so strong that this person just doesn't love me and they don't want to be with me. And I can't understand it. Like the analytical me is just like spinning out, like just collapsing. I go inside and it's empty. There's no one and I'm screaming, and I grew up in a religious home, but I didn't practice any sort of faith at the time. And I actually prayed out loud to God, I need help. And I didn't even know what I was doing, but like I was so lost of what the hell was happening to me in my life that this had come to this point. And so I think I sort of sat around for a few minutes. I went up to the third floor of this sort of beach condo or whatever it was. And I got onto my computer and I just started searching, like, why does my wife hate me? Just things like that. And I had come to an article that this guy, Steve Horseman, had written that was attached to the Gottman Institute. So we all know Steve Horseman now, Good Guys to Great Men. So that like evening, I'm like filling out this application. So the article, I felt like it was credible because, and it was talking about all this stuff. Now, I've never ever seen anything like this, where basically what we've been talking about on this podcast was written in this article, and it was on Gottman's page. And I thought, well, Gottman is a reliable marriage counseling. I then go to Good Guys to Great Men, Steve Horseman's site, for men experiencing all these issues. And there's an application to have a one-on-one call with him. And so I do the application. It's like way longer than I expect it to be, but I am just like, I need help, right? Like I'm filling this thing out, like very in depth, submit the application. And I'd gone to bed, but I wake up the next morning and I had gotten a video response back from Steve, which I was just like blown away that this guy himself had responded on this video response. And it was an invitation to their like community call that happened to be going on that day. That was a Wednesday. And so long story short, I end up getting on the call. I sign up, I get on the call, and
I remember you joining that call, actually.
Yeah, like there's like 40 guys on this call, and people are sharing their stories, and I'm like, holy shit, like there are other people that are experiencing this. Like, I'm not a unicorn. That was one of the greatest feelings that I had, was like there are other people that are going through this, and there's on those calls there's people in various levels of what they've gone through. So people that have sort of gone through it and felt like they've been helped. So I didn't know who anybody was at the time, but there was the community Facebook page, which I then got logged into. And so I'd go on and I would sort of post. This was obviously after the call. So the weeks following up the call, I'd go on and I'd post. And so I got hooked up with a coach to do one-on-one with, and that specific didn't work out for me. But you and I had been just sort of having exchanges on the community where I felt like your style of response it spoke to me because it was very intellectual. Like I got it. It connected with me. And so long story short, we end up having a call ourselves. Then I got into the mentoring men community, and now Masterful Men. And we've done 30 one-on-one sessions over the last almost 3 years and gone through courses and learned a tremendous amount about this emotional adolescence. I would say it's been a guided walk taking me from that emotional childhood to emotional adulthood that I didn't have. And that's no fault to anyone. Like nobody tells us that, hey, that's within you. And I feel fortunate now.
It's not a weakness, by the way. I mean, if you think about other kinds of adolescence, like we take our adolescent children, we put them in schools, we take them to physicians. Like our life is filled with guides in almost every conceivable way in every transition we encounter as a human being. But men have been sold this belief that you're supposed to have this emotional transition without a guide. I would suggest most of us have an awareness or a wish that had been our fathers, but I don't think our fathers knew how to guide us through that because, to be blunt, most of our fathers had never actually left emotional childhood. So men feel all this
they weren't
like it's
guided.
Weakness. No, they weren't. Anyway, I just want to pipe that in there because it's a common challenge.
And yeah, like there's, I don't know, I'd probably Under Saturn's Shadow, the book, if anybody wanted to go, like that gives a little bit of like a history of why sort of the breakdown of like, where did those guides go? Like we don't really have them anymore, to no fault of anybody's, that it just circumstances around our history over the last 100 years has led to there not really being that. And so the story that we have been sold is that emotional guide or well-being or fulfillment is when you find a spouse, and they are that. That is, and I use this because I think it's like, it's so good. The Jerry Maguire, "You Complete Me," absolute bullshit of that is the best summary of modern day, what is told to us. Modern day tutelage of what emotional well-being is that you find that in your spouse and then you're completed. And if you don't, well, you're really a failure. If you can't find your other half, you're a half. You're not a whole person. Figuring out all of that over the last 2.5 years has been a tremendous shift for me. It's not all sunshine and roses. We're human beings. We have day-to-day life where there's challenges, but I view everything now as an opportunity. And even, I have a teenage daughter now. Like teenage daughters and their mothers are like oil and water, but it's opportunity now show up. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that all this happened. I'm thankful for the strength that my wife had to sort of like push back on the way that this was, because it's made me grow as a man in a way that I couldn't imagine not being now, for the challenges that lie ahead in being a father to 3 girls. It's imperative that this happened.
Have there been any like big shifts that stand out to you, where you had maybe a sudden realization or some key realizations about yourself in that process of crossing from emotional immaturity towards emotional adulthood?
You know the answer to this, but yes. It was, I sort of always knew that there was some sort of feeling of not enoughness, like that was really like what was missing, and that I was seeking that out and doing things and trying to have that fulfilled from her, and not just her, but girlfriends prior to that. So I started thinking about that, and I was like, my not enoughness, feeling that strongly, went back to grade school, elementary school. And I, like, basically to as far back as I can remember, 5 years old. And it got alleviated in junior high when girls started giving me attention. I went from feeling like not enough to feeling like the freaking king of the world. And that is what I continued chasing throughout, junior high and high school. I got that. And through, the girls that I viewed as like the top queens of what I could, in my little pond, the most colorful fish, right? Like, and they wanted me. There was no lack of acceptance. It was like, it was amazing. And then college, bigger pond, and I'm not receiving that. So those feelings of low self-worth that were existing from, what I can remember from 5 years old to, I don't know, maybe 12 or whatever, that came back at 19, 20 years. So all of that feeling returned from college through meeting my wife, which was at 26 years old. And I had some relationships in there, but it wasn't until I met her who was, I viewed as, again, this like just prime example of a woman that I would want to be with. And she was interested in me again. And it's like, boom, I got it. Like now all I have to do to keep her is provide. Be a bulldozer. Just build, provide. And so that was sort of step one of the recognition that like I had a gaping hole inside of me and I used women to fill that. Yeah. And so then I went, okay, like, well, where did this gaping hole come from? I need to delicately walk around this, I think, because it grew up in a Christian household that was the fire and brimstone explanation of Christianity that is not the Christianity that I know today. So, and
say more about that. Like you mentioned fire and brimstone, but when it relates to self-worth, tell me, like, connect that dot for me.
Judgment. It was the message that I received through the church and what primarily my mother had received herself was that you're born a sinner and you're not good enough. Like you're not good enough for eternal salvation because you're a human being. And unless you accept Jesus Christ as your savior, you're damned to hell. And so you're literally not good enough. Now, I can recall hearing this message as early as I can remember hearing words, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know what any of that meant, and it just felt like an awful lot of judgment. And the only way you had to be perfect in order to somehow be accepted. And so it was just a realization that was kind of the messaging about being a human that I had received early on. That's sort of what the crux and message of Christianity at the early 80s and 90s. And
can I mirror some of this back to you to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying?
You may.
Okay. What you're describing is a belief system where you have no value and worth because your heart is desperately wicked. Who could know it? All your righteousness is like filthy rags. And the typical verse is quoted for this. And so you have no worth, no value, unless you have these specific beliefs about Jesus, which the irony of that, just to kind of connect dots maybe people aren't seeing, is what you told us is you had a view of self-worth, which is ironic. It came from your wife, which is actually wife worth. That's not self-worth. That's woman worth, girl's worth, right? And a lot of people learn a Christian message and actually embrace it as godly and righteous, that you still don't have any worth, despite the Christian message saying you're created in the image of the Almighty, that you still don't have self-worth, that your worth comes from being saved, which is not actually giving you worth in a lot of Christian messages, but is giving you essentially a canceled certificate of worthlessness. It's very confusing to a lot of people, but you see how that kind of still leaves you in a place where, well, I don't have worth, I'm worthless, but I have this kind of like this, I got my ticket punched despite being worthless.
That is what I felt. And so it was just all of this, despite the intellectual work that I had been doing, none of it had sunk in until 2 to 3 months ago, where the roller coaster of the marriage, it seemed like I had changed a lot of behaviors, but on the inside, I hadn't really changed. I just changed how I was being on the outside. And this deep dive into just a recognition that this pain went back so far, and the real transformation, or when I started to just feel differently, was this recognition that that was all bullshit. And I had, through the Christian messaging that I had, also received all growing up, was that, God is love, and, that you are loved and all things can be forgiven. And so that part I also had swirling around up there. You're inherently good. And, having done a lot of reading over the last 3 years as well, and talking with you, and really just sort of adopting that more unconditional high regard of self, and that I am inherently good and I don't need anybody to provide, any sort of worth to me beyond myself. Like, it's just, it is there. It is 100% is whole, and it's not anybody else's job to find that in me. And I don't know. I don't know that I could walk through how I just figured that out, but it became very apparent to me. There was a very low period that I had, so my wife is like working on a project, and that, I was reviewing that and felt like maybe I was still not seen in a very good light. And it just kind of brought me down, and was feeling really, really quite low about that, and trying to get back to just like doing some things for myself. And this is a bit of weird, and this is, not turning this into like a Christian podcast here, and I not practice. I don't go to church or any of that. But so I went for a run. I was running on the treadmill, and I feel like I got tears just running down my face as I'm running on the treadmill. And I don't remember exactly the words in my head that I was speaking, but I basically was just like something along the lines of like, why am I not enough? Whether I manifested this image in my head on my own, or this was some sort of like out of body experience, I pictured what my view of Jesus is, just like embracing me and saying, you are enough. And I mean, I could say like this was an unusual experience, but from that day forward, I have not felt a need to get that from somebody else.
So the big shift there was moving from an externalized sense of self-worth, which doesn't, again, that's a paradoxical, ironic, to an internal sense of self-worth, just coming to see that you do have value and worth and significance as a human being already.
Yeah.
That's a big aha.
Yeah.
And just because some people might not be able to read between the lines and listening to this, but it doesn't sound like you, even though you're not a self-described religious person, you didn't throw out everything. It sounds like that you thought about your upbringing. I mean, you're describing actually a transformation that has some religious things in it, which is interesting. And so it's not that you had to say like, oh, this Jesus stuff is rubbish, but what you let go of was the idea that Creator, Jesus, see you as some sort of fundamentally broken, valueless, and worthless thing.
Yeah. In summary, that idea was gone. Okay. So it was more the like, yeah, not only am I whole and good, like every person is or has that capacity. Our behaviors, certainly as my behaviors were not good, but I was a good whole person, and then seeing other people that way, and this other people's behaviors are very challenging at times, but those don't make up who the person is. And I wouldn't myself want to be judged solely on the behaviors that I have, because it's just the way that we're doing our best as we go throughout the world and the inputs that we have, and sometimes we don't have all of the best inputs. That's the story of, I didn't have all of the best inputs in how I had received them and programmed them, in. So I had a lot of poor behaviors trying to work through all of that.
When we started this call, you used two different words I think we should revisit, and that was bulldozing and chasing. And what I would just kind of reflect here is you have just told a story where you bulldozed and chased self-worth. Like, you saw those as two primary ingredients to find your value and worth as a human, chasing and bulldozing. Fair statement?
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like it produced a very good result for you.
Well, I mean...
Side effects, yes, but not it didn't produce the result.
It didn't build that, but the bulldozer breaking down and the tracks falling off and running out of diesel forced me to get out and seek a different way.
Let's talk about that. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about the journey itself from that first... You kind of mentioned the journey from meeting Steve and to meeting me, and and whatnot, but talk a little bit about the role that community and, meeting other men, coaching, mentoring, and not as a commercial for these things, but I don't think a lot of men outside looking in understand how some of these things fit together. But community coaching, mentoring, brotherhood, that all played some sort of role in going from emotional immaturity to emotional maturity. And I'd like to hear more about that.
I think that the community was probably the most important factor in all of this because, I'm a very vulnerable person. I'm very open with my story, and I want people to sort of learn and get something out of, what I'm learning, hopefully. So, I used the communities to share the struggles that I was going through. If I was feeling hard emotions about something, I would post about it or do a short video and post that. This was just this amazing thing about the community of men that they hold up a mirror for you and help you. They never ever point at the other person and say, you are a victim, unless obviously you're truly being like abused. But for the most part, when you're explaining your situation, you just have these men that want the best for you and can work out and help you see where you're not empowering yourself. And so every time that I would do that and I would post about whatever it was that was frustrating me, I would have men that would engage with me and say, hey, have you looked at it this way? Have you looked at it that way? And I love direct feedback. Like I thrive on that. I'm not afraid to have somebody tell me that, you're wrong, or you're looking at this way, or frankly, you're just being a dick. So I benefited greatly from that. So the best way that I could describe that is like I was coming to my tribe, crying and whining, or at times, or just throwing a fit or a tantrum, and having the elders of that tribe sort of take me under their wing and just say, hey, like, let me show you a different way. Let me show you how you're not approaching this, from the best. And they showed me. There was no judgment. There was no game about the way that I was feeling. Was men that had experienced this themselves and wanted me to walk a different path and see it a different way and help me through that. And that is what we're missing generally. We don't have open access to that sort of community where we did probably, 100 years ago or more. And so we have these communities on the fringe that you have to go seeking out when you're at the depths of despair. And it's really sad. And so actually another part of like what sort of came over me in this man from my community took his own life. And, in the last, 5 years or so, I am aware of 4 or 5 men that have taken their own lives. And, I don't know all of them personally that well, but if you're taking your own life, there's obviously some emotional pain there. And that's incredibly sad to me. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to get the help that I needed, because I don't think I was so far. I don't think any man is so far away from that. I don't think they're as far away from that as they realize, because some of these things are very difficult to deal with if you don't have that community of men and support.
Yeah, despair is the word that comes up for me. I think a lot of men know what that feels like. A common thing for us when we feel despair now is to isolate ourselves. And when you isolate yourself and you're despairing, the despair grows. Because despair and shame, they trick you into believing that you really are different. You're especially broken. You're beyond redemption. A lot of other terrible things. And then you see that. You see people taking their life, and it's really horrible. And I do think that is, for men, largely related to men being so disconnected from other men. And at the same time, I appreciate it. There's no shortage of men's communities out in the world. I think one distinction about masterful men compared to many is many men are in this spot you are, And a community or a message just gives them a new form of bulldozing. Yeah, it's like a new set of rules to achieve their value and worth, but that is still outside of self. Like if you achieve this, if you achieve that, if you accomplish these things, if you accomplish that. And so it's real easy to get hoodwinked in that. And then you try a new thing, and it's basically a new religion, which I would say a religion is anything that you do to try to achieve worth at its fundamental level. So if you're chasing success, you're religious. If you're chasing feminine validation, you're religious. And if you're chasing even men's work in some flavors to try to feel good about yourself by accomplishment, by doing, it's going to let you down. You're going to end up despairing. And so finding a place where, that's affirmative as a beginning point of your value and worth, I think is a huge asset to a man and an antidote for all of the despair and suicide that's happening in our midst.
Yeah. The despair is probably the best way to describe. And it feels the general messaging to us is that we have to deal with it on our own, and that you can't share that. You can't be vulnerable. And trying to manage despair alone it's a recipe for disaster. And that disaster doesn't have to be as catastrophic as taking your own life, but it could be blowing up your marriage. It could be having an affair. It could be these more nuclear options of trying to find that self-worth from these external things. Turning your attention towards, chronic working out, or, where it's not healthy, or drinking too much, where you're not present, any version of just not being present. So particularly when you have children and, a family, it's a way for a continuation of this problem to happen, because now you don't have fathers at home or spending as much time with their children to help raise and lead them.
Well, speaking of children, tell us a little bit about how your relationships have changed, if they've changed, things like your confidence and your purpose, your relationship with doing. A lot of men hear a message like you're saying, and they fear going through the same transformation you're talking about, because they believe, are they just going to lose all motivation to do things? Are they just going to become a lazy bum who doesn't accomplish anything in the world? Because again, remember, most people I work with and speak to are like you. They're high achievers. And so they have this fear of this message turning them into like a flaccid blob of insignificance. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So my relationship with my kids is, I would say, it wasn't bad before, but I used to get pretty angry with them, because I just felt like such crap myself that I was an emotional roller coaster, and I would lash out, not physically, but from an emotional standpoint of if they did something wrong, then I was judging and shaming them into trying to do that differently. And now I am far more empathetic to what they're experiencing, and I recognize that. I acknowledge their feelings. And this isn't soft parenting. I see what you got going on, and, giving them some space to feel that and understand it, and then, guiding them forward in some other way. If it's a place that I need to parent and give choices, then I'm doing that. And a lot of times it's just listening. I used to try to fix every single problem that they had. And now I'm more of I try to listen more, because I have 3 daughters. The error of my ways with my wife too before was it was a lot of fixing energy, constant fixing energy, or you don't feel good about this, let me do something more. And now with them and with her, I need more work with her, because I still try to fix stuff a lot. But I just sit back and listen and be someone that they can lean on. And they do a lot. They're very comfortable coming to me, and I think they feel very safe with me. So that part has been great. I won't get too much into my wife, but I think there was a lot of pain to unwind, and that is a process that is still going and working, but we have made tremendous progress.
Do you
and we're
feel
still.
more, let's look at it this way, because I think there's a way to talk about that. And I'm glad you brought this up, because transformation stories are not finished stories. We're never done transforming. And these podcasts are not like, hey, this, Craig is finished now. It's about honoring the story that you're in. And that has a present tense to it, doesn't it? So there is pain to sort through. And I'm curious, do you feel like you have the tools and the resiliency now to navigate, or to walk with your wife through that pain?
I do. And I mean, one of those tools that I recognize is like when I'm feeling a pull to go back to sort of the way that I was, it's pretty apparent to me that I'm not taking care of myself. So I'm not sleeping well, I'm not eating well, I'm not exercising. And so in these other communities, they would tell you that you need to do all of those things for your external presentation of yourself. But really, it is the way I feel about myself internally. And when you're, low on rest, or you're not hydrated, or you're not taking care of your body, or you're just not present, and you just tend to seek out what's easiest, which is some sort of external way to make you feel better. So now I can recognize, like, okay, I'm starting to feel these things. One of the first things that I do is I reconnect with the community. Like, that's one of the easiest things to do, is to just, have a post or connect with one of the guys, and just in some way. And I'm dealing with this a little bit right now. We went on vacation. I got out of a routine. I didn't sleep very well at all. I didn't eat well. So this week is sort of like getting back to what I would say is normal. And I never had those tools before. It was more, I would seek it outside of me. And if it wasn't given to me, I'd get angry, and then I would go drink. And so now I'm able to just sit back, pause, reflect on things, and realize, okay, like, your power is within you. Nobody's doing anything to you. You have the power to feel better, and you can do something about it. So the doing energy becomes more about doing stuff for yourself than doing stuff for other people to get some sort of, external feedback for that.
So it became an expression of value instead of a tool to try to gain it.
Very much so. So that will lead to, am I still a bulldozer? No. I used to spin myself out trying to do everything. And so I did a lot of things okay. And now I do less things that I think other people want from me. So there's not as much, because I'm not doing things that I'm looking for validation for. So that has allowed me to focus more on things that I want to do for myself. So within my business, I'm a leader in our community, and I take that seriously in the conversations that I have with men, and I've wanted to have more coaching conversations. So I've gone out, and I'm in part of this coaching course that, not a requirement, but I wanted to be able to do it. And so I've put time towards that. And, we'll have some sort of accreditation for coaching and talking with guys. So that's going to be just standard coaching, but also in alcohol-free living, which I feel pretty good about. And then at work, I made some changes that needed to be made long ago. And that, from a staffing perspective, and that has allowed me to myself be more present at my office and make changes that need to do, and going a direction which lets me sort of funnel my energy in the places that are more important, rather than being just dispersed everywhere, trying to bulldoze in every direction. So I'm much more intentional, and it has had a pretty substantial impact on my income and what I'm able to do. So I would say it's all been very positive.
What do you wish you had done or understood sooner?
Yeah, I just that I am enough.
Period. That's a great way to say that. So realizing that people might be listening to this who say, "Man, he's telling my story. I feel just like that." What would you tell somebody listening who feels stuck? Like, what's the first thing they should do, and what do you want them to know is possible?
The first thing is reach out to get connect with someone. You can do one-on-one calls. You can connect with the community at a an extremely low cost. And, yeah, this sounds like a bit of a commercial, I suppose, but it's really, and frankly, who cares? You know what? Like, I can remember talking with you and signing up for RMM, the Renewed Masculine Man, and thinking like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to pay this course fee. And now I look at this and it's like this, I would have paid 10 times more money for how I feel now. I didn't know it at the time. So I think that the easiest thing to do is to stop isolating. You're not going to figure it out alone. You need guides in your life that really just want the best for you. And that's all that I've ever experienced, whether it was at Good Guys or with you or, the other mentors that I've spoke with throughout this journey. Is these guys they want the best for you. And it's a constant reminder that this is an inside game. And yeah, just step over that line and reach out for help. Yeah. Step one.
Yeah. And I would add to that, I don't necessarily think it matters if that's with us. I think the important thing is to invest in your own journey, which for some people will just be time, and to find somebody who's willing to be a guide. One of the challenges when you're emotionally immature is that you have emotionally immature thoughts about such things, and you have cynicism, you have all kinds of sabotaging beliefs about the very process of transformation.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in insurance. We had a meeting this morning, a team meeting. And so I was describing to my team and the conversations that we have with people, our risk assessors. It is our job to uncover risk. It's not our job to sell anything to anyone. It's our job to assess situations and see where the potential risks are. It's really no different with a man who's struggling or is experiencing despair. Is that, we see this now. It's very apparent to me when I see a man that is struggling or is in despair. And so in the same vein is just to try to be vulnerable enough to share our stories and, hey, this is available to you. This is out there. I can see that this risk exists, that you're experiencing despair, that you've got a lot of things tied up in external things, and there's a place for you to unwind that. Now, whether people do that or not, like we can't control that, but at least making it aware to them that it's an option. That is what I plan to be doing myself, is to try to get that word out there, because frankly, it's really sad to me that families are falling apart, that men are taking their lives, that women are experiencing the weight and pressure and, from men that are not emotionally mature.
Yeah, I know. I hear from a good bit of them. In fact, I hear from as many women as I do men. And their kind of persistent question is, what do I do to get my husband or fiance or partner to even want to do this? Women are clamoring for men to experience this emotional transformation that a man doesn't know he needs, because he's generally numbed himself out, with drink, video games, porn, whatever, work, or is so incredibly angry that he can't hear, right? It's very sad.
It's a
experience.
hard part. I mean, my wife never said I want a divorce, but in many arguments, it was apparent to me that she was done. And so I think that's the hard part about this, is for women that see this and are experiencing this, is the catalyst is sort of being done. Or, I'm not suggesting, because not every man that hears I'm done is going to go and get help to try to change themselves. But for anybody that has boundaries that they're trying to put up, you have to be okay with actually being done, and that person may not change, but you have to do what's best for you. And then sometimes that person will recognize and turn it around, but you can't get anybody to do it. They need to be faced with the reality of that same thing. And it's a problem, because men are very immature, generally speaking. And so
Stunted. Yeah.
Stunted. Yeah. And it's very easy to go find another, it's easy. I think it's easier for men to just go and find another woman who fills that void for them than it is for a woman that has, responsibilities and motherhood and all of that. And it is a big challenge where I think this is why it's so important for us, because we have to try to connect and get to men to have them understand before it's too late. And I don't know what the magic there is, but
well, I mean, to really distill that down into simple terms, there's two general motivations for anything, and that's pain and pleasure. And so some men are inspired by seeing the pleasure in your life. They might look at your family dynamic and say, wow, like, how'd you do that? You seem to have a wife who loves you, appreciates you, because that's what you were looking for, right? They see the way you relate to your daughters and that your daughter's fawn over you, and they see the fruit. Like, that's one way. And some men will certainly use that as a catalyst to go through their own journey. The vast majority, unfortunately, it will be pain, and it will be when the pain of not doing anything rises to the level of emergency. So I meet the vast majority of men in that spot. And it's usually because a woman has said, I'm done. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. I want space. I think we should separate. I think we should divorce, or I'm having an affair. There's some sort of breaking point. And so what I would tell any man is pursue these things from a place of desire and pleasure instead of waiting until they escalate to a pain and crisis. But most won't listen to that. And, that's not a character defect in men. We are made to give extreme focus to things that feel important.
No, and when, I had said this to you a couple of weeks ago, that I feel as though I have like a skill set or aptitude to explain sort of the need here where somebody could recognize it and see it. And part of that is being vulnerable with my own story.
Yeah, that's why we're telling them.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate to be able to do that, and that, that I have a story to tell. And I say that I think we're coming up to the end here. 4 years ago, one of the biggest things that I could say is I could not have told you that I would be happy that all of this had happened. And this is the greatest gift that I have had that looked like the greatest possible despair that I could have. I thought that my marriage was going to end. I didn't know what the circumstances of, my relationship with my kids would be. Financially, I didn't, it looked like my life was going to crumble. And that is very much not what happened. And I embrace all of that now. It was a great...
That was going to be my actual next question, was going to be, something you never expected to gain from this transformation or a perspective. And I love the way you put that you didn't just avert a crisis, but it turned out to be a great catalyst for you, it sounds like, in taking your life into an entirely different direction that you hadn't imagined.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, the key to that was stopping judging my wife for the feelings that she was having, and trying to then empathize with those and reflect and, again, to sort of solidify that none of this is that I have taken a back seat as a man or as a leader in my home, or that, I'm okay with not having intimacy in my relationship. Like, none of that is true. There's a much better version of all of that than, man, hear me roar and you owe this to me because I'm stronger. That's
because I make the money.
Yeah, I make the money and I'm physically more strong, so therefore you owe this to me. Like, that level of thinking will
very
lead,
inspiring.
It's not inspiring. It's going to lead to despair. So,
all right, one last question. I'll ask it two different ways. What should have I asked you? What should have I asked you but didn't? Or another way of saying that is, an hour from now, what are you going to say? Oh, we should have talked about such and such.
I mean, I think that the biggest thing here is like the sexless marriage. We didn't really talk about that, and maybe on purpose, but I'll glaze over that a little bit.
I'll do a separate episode about that as a topic instead of a particular story.
I think that there's a very important part of this, though, and that, like, through the healing process for my marriage, there was a long period of time where there was no intimacy, where had you asked me 5 years ago, hey, Craig, if you have no physical intimacy for 15 months, like, what are you going to do? I would have, at like a snap of fingers, said, I will divorce her. There's like, what are you, crazy? Like, my wife's not going to be intimate with me. Like, that, what kind of man would I be? And going through that, I didn't die. Like, I came to realize that, oh, like my self-worth actually is within me, and it wasn't that. And I wasn't even that a huge role in my overall feeling of self-worth. And so to move away from that and to give myself that space to not be so wrapped up in that.
It's not self-worth. I mean,
No.
that's sex worth. Yeah, zoom out for a minute and try to take an outsider's perspective. And I would ask our listener, who is the stronger man? The man that has to blow up his marriage after, some arbitrary period of time of no intimacy, or the man who could turn all of that around? Like, which do you instinctively know is a stronger man?
Yeah, the person who could turn it all around. And I use this sort of analogy of if you were going into battle and you needed someone to lead you, do you want a leader who has lost, however many battles, but keeps coming back for more? Or would you want to be with one who won in glorious fashion, but really not really sure if they're, have the wherewithal? Maybe they got lucky.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
I think that's a great metaphor. Great metaphor.
And yeah, there are men out there that I mean, I'm one of them now that can say, like, hey, this is not what life is all about. It's just not. And all of that energy gets directed into more fruitful places. So
right, yeah. I'm sure we'll do plenty of episodes about intimacy challenges and whatnot, because it's all rooted in the same things. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about this. I get probably about half of my inquiries from men are about, sexless marriage, low intimacy, and they haven't connected the dots. So I'm glad to be able to have a conversation like this, because most of those men just think, I have a partner problem. I have a woman that's disinterested, and they don't see the role that their emotional immaturity has played in the whole thing, because culture, and like in your story, people are telling them, no, man, you've got a wife problem. You just need to get a new woman. But I've also talked to a number of them who then they just end up recreating the same circumstance with a new woman. And now you're in your 70s, certain things aren't starting to work so well, and you're saying to yourself, boy, I haven't figured this out. I'm on my third long-term relationship. I'm not happy. I still don't feel like I've ever found that thing that I'm looking for, to borrow some Bono words. And now the end is near. What do I do? And I
think what you have always sort of hit home is there are some women that need to be left. No, it's not as though it's always, a man is bad and you like, there are people that do bad things and aren't good to be with.
100%.
One of the parts of this and this journey and learning is I've learned the tools to be able to accurately assess that for me.
Right.
And so, yeah, the answers that I give myself is my wife is not a person that I would leave because we're working through this thing, because there are so many other wonderful things that she brings to the table that are more important than the fact that we're in this season. We're healing through that.
This is true with all partner conflict, I would say, is men want to make a decision before they actually have clarity. And so the first step is to become an emotionally mature, confident, grounded, calm, resilient man so that you can make a clear decision. If you try to make that decision without that first step, you're going to make a decision based on a lot of misjudgment. And I probably said this to you early on. I say it to a lot of men. If you don't know how to captain a yacht and you just blow up your yacht because you don't know how to captain it, you're sinking a lot of yachts in the process of learning that you suck as a captain. And that's how most men approach marriage. Most men just suck at captaining marriage. And so they blow up their marriage thinking they have a marriage problem. And so my encouragement to them, because I had to do it myself, I was about ready to blow my own marriage up, was learn to be a great captain so that you are confident, like I know how to sail a lot of it.
Well, and right. So how do you know that? And
how do you know you're a good captain?
Well, yeah. And so we have tools to be able to assess that. It's like, all right, how do I want to be as a man? And then, like, independent of all of those, of a woman, how do I want to be as a man? Am I showing up that way every single day on a day-to-day basis, regardless of what that relationship is? And so, those are not things you think about prior to being forced with these challenges. But I think that's like an assessment that, the 30-day assessment of how you're showing up in these areas that course has. So, I've sort of distilled that. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I can recognize I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not going to bed on time. I'm not sleeping. I'm not exercising. I'm not eating well. I'm not drinking enough water. I'm not reading. I'm not filling my mind. I'm not feeding my soul. And if I'm not doing all of those things, I know I'm not showing up well. That's a great tool or self-assessment to be able to have. That has absolutely nothing to do with my work.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you coming and sharing your story with us. The first of many times. We'll have you back and share some more. None of our stories are done, right?
So I'm sure I've got. Well, I know I have a lot more. Yeah, I have a lot more to say. I'm an open book.
I appreciate your vulnerability.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I was hoping to be the first guest, but Brian beat me to it. So
yeah. All right, brother. Thanks again.
Right, thanks. Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Masterful Man podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to break free from stuckness, build unshakable confidence, and lead your life with unstoppable purpose, I invite you to take the next step. Join a community of men who are committed to growth, challenge, and real transformation. Learn more at www.masterful.men, because the life you want starts with the man you choose to become.